Just a small thing here. On what you're saying there and on the timeline, and we're talking about history and you have to take things away and learn for yourself. That timeline is actually on a European time scale. Okay? So you can find the things in Europe, the European time scale. It's not even on an African time scale. But what the problem is, if you say to a child, AD 325, or you say to a child, oh, this happened in AD 325, this happened in BC 325. They haven't got a clue what you're talking about. You say to them, this happened at this time, this happened at this time. Well, hang on a minute, so this happened before this? So you close it up like this, you're not doing anything, they just see a picture, and that's it. Oh, and I need to say one tiny little thing to the brother over there. BBC Radio 4, they did a really good thing on Hannibal, and it was a guy, I think his name is Mark Steele if I'm not mistaken, he's a comedian, because comedians can say all them things. And he said that, he talked about Hannibal traveling with elephants, and he kept saying, elephants! But comedians can always get away with it. And he was saying the same thing, he said Hannibal was black, and he was always told that Hannibal, everyone was laughing, ha ha ha, because a comedian can say it and get the information across. But you say it as being serious, nobody wants to know what you're saying.
Quickly, on this issue,
Absolutely. I'm not going to do what would be my instinct here would be to be very defensive and suddenly start saying we no longer teach Egypt like this anymore in this museum. The gallery, we know we're going to change it. Absolutely, it's going to change. That's not what I want to talk about. Can I just pick up something absolutely, because I'm really interested in what Saeed said. Saeed said we need to change how we look at this, because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere beyond this is right, this is wrong, you're right, I'm wrong, whatever. And I think this idea of personalizing some of this and looking at our own practice and how we think, because after 25 years of this kind of work in museums, I'm terribly interested in whether any of these contradictions are in me, you know, in how we work. And I think that's a much more interesting thing to start looking at our own practice. And one of the questions I have for you, for the panel, is it ever valid to disagree and for that not to be racist? Because my question is that I know that I've disagreed with Jaya over 6 years of arguments, and I respect her too much not to disagree with her if I don't agree. If you know what I'm saying here. There is an issue there, and I think and it does come back to the question around the development of that particular exhibition. There was a disagreement on that panel developing that exhibition. And it was an interesting debate that was shared by not only museum staff, other people who were involved in the development of that exhibition. And it wasn't about the content, it was about how to represent the stories. And it is around this issue about can we make a valid disagreement that isn't about racism, but being really examining, is there racism in that disagreement? I don't know if that makes sense.
No more. Let me, and bring you in. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just quite sceptical of like your defence of the museum, because you like blame it on the objects. You're kind of saying, you know, that we're stuck with these collections. You know, we've only got these particular objects to speak with. But it's the way that they're interpreted, because you've got something like that tusk from Benin out there, and it sort of says, this was acquired when some Brits, you know, popped over to Benin one year. It was stolen in that punitive mission, right, when the British went there to take the country over. But that's not even mentioned on the panel. And I mean, how difficult can it be to use what you've already got, but to tell a different story? You know, Fred Wilson in Baltimore went into this history museum, didn't take anything with him, and just using what was in the store, managed to expose how racist that museum was. That's got to be possible somewhere like this. And that's why it's so critical to get people in from different communities, from ethnic communities or whatever you want to call them, because sometimes it's not so easy for white museum professionals to see these other stories necessarily.
So we got to, I'll bring you in.
If you looked at the panel, at the case to its right and to its left, with the Revealing Histories trail, which started to do exactly what you recommended, which was to reinterpret these collections in that way. And 2 members of staff from this museum, not me, who went around and selected particular objects and reinterpreted them in light of kind of post-colonial thinking and stuff. And we did exactly what you recommended. We've started.
Well, I was in here a couple of days ago and I didn't notice that. So has it been done well enough?
There is a question posed, are we actually addressing the wrong issue? That is, our museum's racism. Is that a wrong question to be posing at all? I wonder if any member of the panel want, yeah, okay, yeah.
I don't know whether I'd call it a right question or a wrong question. It is a question. But I think what you're talking about is the exclusiveness, is the excluding sort of tendency of not just museums, but a lot of institutions. And I think, I mean, I do agree with that. I think that they are excluding. I think that it's one aspect of what, that was what I was going to talk about when I checked out my notes, that how does racism manifest itself. I think that's one of the things, the exclusiveness. But it's not just racism that does that, it's gender, it's class, it's all that. But I think you are right about how do we deal with the fact that it exists. And I think that's what people are trying to address. What do we do about I think that it's given that racism and all those exclusionary things exist. But what do we do next? And I think there are questions there that are important. I mean, I agree with Bernadette about the disagreement. You have to disagree. I get really kind of stuck when people don't disagree. They withdraw if they've got something to say, and then you're kind of sitting there with no dialogue. But I do think there are other issues around that, like who's controlling what happens, what gets sent out, what gets projected, and things like that. And that's what we have to think about.
Yeah, I just sort of say from my point of view, it's like, like a punter, as it were. I mean, I do work for a heritage organisation, but I don't work for a museum. When I think of Manchester Museum, I think of it as the museum. I know what you said about it being a museum of natural history or whatever, but I think Manchester Museum is the museum, and then you have all these other museums which are specialist museums. You have Museum of Science and Industry, you have People's History, and it's like all these are weird specialist things we think of, science or the history of the working class. And like Manchester Museum is the big museum, it's the mainstream one. Like we have the Slavery Museum now in Liverpool. It seems like these kind of things are like sort of the specialist subjects and they're not part of mainstream history. I don't really think it's that.